Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, and we're back to looking at Tom King's run on Batman. The next few episodes will be wrapping up the whole thing, which is good, since while I've so far liked it more than Tynian's run on Detective Comics, this has been decidedly more of a slog to get through. To recap, we left off on The Price, where Flash gave Bats grief for trying to tell Gotham Girl what to do. Even though we never really saw that in previous issues, this somehow led her to fall under the sway of Bane in an effort to revive her brother Hank, aka Gotham. This story was sandwiched in between nightmares, where Pointy Ears went through several fear-toxin-induced dream scenarios intended to drive him mad, after the Flashpoint version of his dad got the drop on him. Bruce said he wasn't tired, but Flashpoint Thomas put him to bed anyway, because that's called parenting. Let's resume taking issue with Batman with issue number 70, beginning The Fall and the Fallen.
I ain't got a witness, and I can't prove it, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
The cover sees battle-damaged Bats tied to the doorway of a prison cell, with numerous villains behind him. Oddly, no Joker to say he makes a better door than a window. Missed opportunity, I say. We begin with Maxie Zeus reciting William Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, as some panels remind us of the previous arc. Batman busts out of the machine that's been tormenting his mind, and is 2 pages worth of angry, apparently. He's in the depths of Arkham Asylum, and the first face he sees is the Riddler, who gives him, what else, a riddle to solve before he'll cough up any answers. So Pointy Ears solves his query, but not before slamming Nigma's face into his knee and leaving him unconscious. He brought it on himself by giving a brain teaser right when Bats wakes up. Dude is clearly not a morning person. The riddle has some relevance, as the answer regards a night watchman sleeping on the job, which is kind of what happened to our hero. He then encounters Calendar Man and essentially gives away what this issue is about. Pointy Ears fighting his way out of Arkham, a reversal of how Bane was stalled for a full day back in issue 19. He even repeats how neither of them will ever stop, shooting himself to avoid a fight, and as well as the same Bat timeline. Not every day you see a comic book doing a clip show. Shrewd move, Tom King. Well, he does fight through many of the same villains Bane did, and I think some he didn't. Bats begins speechifying, assuming his enemy can hear him as he scoffs at his plan. For all the times the cape broke him, humiliated him, exposed his vulnerabilities, Bane seemed to overlook the nightmares our hero lives every day, that he is the nightmare, and apparently expected him to curl into a ball and cry for his mommy, all because of some bad dreams. Now, if your mom had also been named Martha, it might have been a different story. He meets up with Mr. Freeze, and while this could have been a good chance for him to apologize for wrongfully attacking him for a crime he didn't commit, or pointing out how Bane manipulated things to frame him, he instead asks the clearly timid villain to think scientifically about their past skirmishes, the stats of his losses, and to consider if it isn't easier to just get taken down with a single punch. If punching people counts as an academic thesis, I'll have my doctorate in no time.
They'll give anybody a degree these days.
The ventriloquist updates Bane about Bats' progress, and they share in the delight of manipulating a puppet, heavily suggesting this too is part of the plan. Next is Scarecrow, and despite having been pumped with enough fear gas to incapacitate elephants, another TAS reference I think, it's a nice scene of the detective turning the tables on Crane and making him howl in terror. Solomon Grundy and Amygdala are up, and naturally we jump to after the fight, where the hallway is absolutely devastated, and Batman just gets up and laughs maniacally.
Laugh with me, Jocko, laugh with me!
One might think Joker gassed him, but there's no indicator of that. Perhaps it's somehow related to when Selina started laughing at the end of issue 49. Both cases may not have been about the clown's toxin, but rather them laughing at the insanity they just face, surviving such ludicrous odds. I can't be certain, but it seems to be the only thing that really makes sense to me, even if it might actually only apply to one scene, this or the other. He knocks Two-Face around, then asks, specifically the trustworthy Harv half, to deliver Bane a message. Bats would have preferred to have talked to Bane.
That sounds like a lie.
But right now, he's tired and is gonna go head to his home in his city. But tomorrow, he'll return with his own army, and then they'll talk. With that, he passes Maxie, concluding the poem, and exits the asylum. Issue 71's cover looks like an epic game of tag has been declared in Wayne Manor, with Flashpoint Thomas and Bane eyeing Bruce. Well, tag or WrestleMania, either one could work. Get ready for another non-linear issue where I talk about two sequence of events one at a time. Batman showed up at the roof of GCPD, where Gordon tells him to get lost, and he doesn't belong there anymore.
I know what you've done. What you are. I know you're not a trick-or-treater with a pituitary disorder. I'm not falling for that again.
Before Bats takes off, he turns the bat signal back on, but this time the light is red. Oh, great. First he punches the commissioner, and now he's become one of those people who insists on making everything more Christmassy months before December. And I guess he went and repaired it without Jimbo noticing, too. The commissioner goes to his office, where his daughter Barbara happens to be waiting, for whatever reason, asking if everything's okay. He mentions how Pointy Ears has gone off the deep end, then showed up out of the very, very dark blue and turned on the signal, but with a red bulb before disappearing. This makes Babs disappear as well. Wait a minute. Red light, Barbara's red hair, red skeleton, it's all connected! She's already swinging across the city as Batgirl. This new costume is kind of a mixed bag for me. I like that it harkens back to her earlier costume, but it's so much like that suit they may have well just put her in those duds. I don't particularly like her mask, or how the bat emblem stretches under her arms to her back. It just kind of looks weird. Anyway, she's contacting various allies about the red signal, even though it was on for only a second, long enough for someone to see. Though she didn't see it, she was told about it, but hey, semantics. Knowing the significance of the color change, most intend to meet up. I wonder if Damien fighting Professor Pig is meant to be a nod to Bruce's second nightmare, though rather dumb of him to call Barb by her name around the villain. Can heroes stop being so completely stupid? Please! We don't see this guy's face, but given the reference to buying a new crowbar to shove up Batsy's backside, we can assume it's Jason Todd, all ticked at Bruce for who cares what reason. Babs, Red Robin, Robin, the Huntress, and the Signal all meet up with the Boss Cape. Oh, and also the infantilized clone of Cassandra Cain.
Burn it! Send it to hell!
Jason doesn't show, nor does Grayson, who's busy being Rick after that bullet to the head. And spoiler alert hasn't answered because either she wanted to sleep in, or reasons I don't feel like looking up. With Batwoman out of the country and 12 hours before her return, Batman explains the situation, with King's customary ellipses, about Bane's takeover of Gotham, how Thomas is helping him, and after weeks of captivity trying to drive Bruce mad, the Bat Army is going to retake the asylum, and the city will be theirs again. Even with that explanation, Barbara seems real casual about taking orders from the guy that decked her dad in the schnoz. Speaking of, if Bats was gone for weeks and Jim wanted nothing to do with him, why not just have the signal dismantled for scrap? And where did his allies think he was all this time? Anyway, they take off, burst into Arkham, with Pointy Ears announcing the end of Bane's game. But all he sees are bewildered staff, wondering what he's talking about. "Sir, this is a Denny's." Later, the group is explaining how there are no records of any inmates leaving their cells. Bane is comatose, and even Alfred is contradicting the story about Flashpoint Thomas. Thinking this is about Catwoman leaving him, Tim tries empathizing with Bruce's pain, and wants him to let the team help, despite his protestations. More on this later. In the present, and done by a different artist, Bruce is in the cave where he's told repeatedly about an intruder alert.
I thought insurance salesmen were pushy.
He puts on his mask and walks through the manor, until arriving at the dining room, with Bane sitting at the far end. The Brute suggests Alfred get Bruce something to eat, and the butler does as Master Bane says, offering his boss some soup, which is promptly smacked away. His best cop friend is mad at him, he's lost control of Gotham, and now he's going to bed without supper, offering his boss some soup, which is promptly smacked away.
I want PB&J!
He then flips the table over, and again threatens to break Bane's back. Bats gets one good punch in, but the villain's return punch knocks him on his outer trunks. Pennyworth helps his surrogate son up, knowing how he feels right now, wanting to fight, and despite helping him all these years, he doesn't say lightly that, for the first time, Batman has lost. Bane has broken him. And remember Tim trying to get him to admit all this behavior has been about Selina leaving him? That got Red R punched in the face. All in all, I'd say those anger management classes are beginning to kick in. Issue 72, with a cover that almost feels pretty standard. Bats in a smoky room, some rips in his costume, and blood dripping from his mouth. If the Dark Knight loses, Gotham falls. Duck Duck Goose just got extreme. Bruce fights his nemesis while Flashpoint Thomas Wayne narrates the explanation of the whole run, as a past conversation with his friend the morning of the wedding. Bane had Hugo Strange attack the plane from the beginning, forcing Bats to the edge and contemplate his mortality, what he had and hadn't done, what he most needed and wanted. Bane directed Strange, Psycho Pirate, and Gotham Girl to play a game, forcing Bats to put together a team of crooks to infiltrate Santa Prisca and defeat its ruler. He even used Holly and Catwoman, putting them together for a mission, and maybe got Ventriloquist involved, and basically provided Selina as someone Bruce could love and feel fulfilled with. Then, possibly with Arnold Wesker's further influence, it seems rather speculative, Bane stomped into Gotham, roaring who he is as a familiar harebrained bad guy Bats is used to fighting. Mirroring the Arkham fight, Bats headbutts him, but such a simple blow doesn't take Bane down, nor did it before. He'd actually wanted to be put in Arkham. Surprisingly, the cafeteria's beef stroganoff was the best he'd ever had. So the muscular menace held back a while, let Bruce and Selina's relationship grow, and it's assumed Bane had gotten to know Batman so well thanks to Riddler and Joker, who knew him better than anyone, that he's no different from his villains. Rather, he feared there was no distinction, so clung to Cat to maintain his humanity. Giving him happiness, intending to rip it away, was at least an original plan, given his other rogues have only ever thought to give him pain. Sure, he had a surrogate family, allies in his fight, but Miss Kyle was different, offering a love that could make him feel whole, putting it above his vow. You know, the thing that she said he'd never do. So Bane, or more likely Riddler, reprogrammed Skeets to manipulate Booster Gold into altering the timeline to show Batman a world where he was content, leaving everything a mess, and thus showing how much the Dark Knight is needed. Narration also says that he told his love of his adventure, but no, Catwoman was there for Booster's explanation, and remember, Bruce didn't actually see this alternate world. Cue Catwoman's old pal Joker, whom she always listened to, even knowing she shouldn't. Don't know where that comes from. He further convinces her that marrying Bats would create the terrible alternate timeline. Thus, after Holly reinforced the same notion just before the nuptials, she left him, Bane lifting Bats up and bringing him down, as demonstrated in the fight as he breaks Wayne's back again. Thomas figures the Bruiser won't stop at that, however. He'll grow his army, continue his game, grind the Caped Crusader down until he quits, showing that the one standing above everyone else, the one everyone bows to, isn't the rich kid that dresses as a bat, but the lad who struggled against the waters every night, clawing his way from the depths of his cell. After making this assessment of all the villain had done and was planning to do to his son, Thomas asked how he might help.
You wouldn't happen to have any embarrassing baby photos, would you?
Okay, so this explanation feels, to say the least, inconsistent. Bane just, out of the blue, decided to mess with Batman's entire life, kinda making it seem like Gotham Girl was in on it the whole time, so I guess her brother being dead is no big deal, and relies on the assumption that he'd agree to work with supervillains instead of, say, his own team to get Psycho Pirate to fix Claire. Then let himself lose twice, not unlike what Bruce did, so yay more parallels between the two, starting from a near plane crash. Luck does so much of the heavy lifting in this scheme that any other superhero wouldn't show up to catch that plane, or that the hyper-prepared Bat would be so taken aback by the experience as to contemplate his mortality instead of pulling a solution out of his cape, or that he wouldn't just die and come back, like Damian wouldn't track down a Lazarus pit for his dad. Oh, and let's not forget that somehow they found Skeets, because again, why would Booster collect the pieces of advanced technology from Crime Alley? Which would involve having that Skeets replace the Skeets already in the present, to say nothing of the risk of altering the timeline, how even small changes could drastically change their present.
Well, we hit a little snag when the universe sort of collapsed on itself.
How is Ventriloquist supposed to aid in anything other than reporting to Bane? I guess we're just going to forget that Scarface doesn't like others giving Wesker orders, and I suppose he's suppressed? And Holly, her whole deal was her orphanage being burned down, and she used Selina's training to get revenge. So did Bane just know that Catwoman would take the fall for that? And when did she ever listen to the Joker? When did his nutty fudgekins perspective ever matter to her? To say that Bane planned every step of this is as clever as it is nonsensical. Sure, it's a good scheme to give his enemy an indication he'll be happy, only to take it away, break him emotionally, but he seemed pretty genuinely mad when Bats wasn't around. I guess it might have given something away if he had, say, smirked while asking for Venom, but then what was the whole deal of Psycho Pirate trying to make him happy? It feels like this whole plot stopped short of being really, really good because it needed misdirection for a big surprise later, and someone thought the more stuff he manipulates, the cleverer he seems. I can understand that, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt it overall with several contradictions. I get that Bane is a master tactician, but I feel like time manipulation is kind of outside his purview. Also, Thomas mentioning the altruistic love of a father for his children really doesn't seem convincing coming from a dude complicit in all this. Also,
Then you send in the Joker.
missed opportunity to have him say, "Send in the clown." For shame, Tom King. For shame. Issue 73's cover sees Bat Tommy on a horse in the desert, with his son tied up and walking behind.
This is how I went to and from school in my day. We didn't have any Segways or e-bikes or avocado toasts.
We open to a similar but not identical scene. They're both in the desert at night, but Bruce is in his civvies, and the horse is dragging a large casket. The next morning, Thomas wakes to find 5 members of the Death in the Desert, whom he's familiar with, and despite looking like one is helping him up, they're not exactly a welcome wagon. But since Pappy considers himself Batman now, he fights them off, to the tune of Home on the Range, which he sings for several pages throughout the story. Afterward, he travels on, makes camp, and later that night, Bruce finally wakes up.
Bane!
He's having his Jeopardy nightmare again. Keeps forgetting to answer in the form of a question. His alternate dad tells him he's been through some stuff and will be scared, but instructs him to recall the lesson of being scared giving you the chance to fight that fear. Bruce wants to know where the luchador is, striking Thomas, but just gets punched back in return. He's told that he lost, had some surgery done, got broken body and soul, and now it's time to show his true strength and rebuild as they hug. It's like a Hallmark movie. Guy from the big city returns to his small hometown for Thanksgiving, so his dad mentally and physically tortures him in a convoluted plot to make him happy. The next morning, Tom offers to walk while Bruce rides the horse, since he's still recovering from having his spine repaired. They're about 100 miles out from Cottam, and the younger Wayne is confused why they're dragging a coffin. But the elder figures the world's greatest detective will understand soon enough.
I wanted it to be a surprise, but it's Dracula in there. I told him I was taking him to Paris, but I'm going to open it up here in the daytime. I just think it's going to be funny to watch him burst into flames and struggle to find a place to hide from the sun.
They stop to make camp, and Bruce wants answers about what he's done. Hurting Alfred, helping Bane, and watching as he got the bat snot knocked out of him. And doesn't even hide the fact that he'd like to slug Thomas, who actually thinks that's a good thing.
Frankly, a kick to the face would be better than getting yet another tie for Father's Day.
The next morning, Bruce wakes up to find several more desert ninjas on the ground, wondering how he didn't hear their approach. He recognizes them as the Death of the Desert, probably a typo and not supposed to be a significantly different group from the Death in the Desert. But moving on, they're Ra's al Ghul's personal guards, and would only be sent out to keep people away from the rumored Nine Pit. And then it dawns on him. The coffin they're dragging contains his mom's body. Proud that his boy caught on, Tom says after all they've been through, they deserve to go home and rest, as a family.
And best of all, your mom will still be young and hot. Best for me, anyway.
Thomas apparently figured Bruce would want his cowl, so he brought it along. As he puts it on, Batman says that after his parents' murder, he surrendered his life to a vow, and now wonders what it was worth and where it led him. Mountains of merchandise, global fame, some really good movies and TV shows, though some not so good. Thomas says he's a good man, but it's time for his pain to end, and now is the time for resurrection. Issue 74's cover has alternate father and son about to throw down, as bats flutter above them, I'm assuming taking bets on the winner. You open to the two fighting more voracious men, including their leader, whom Thomas runs through with a sword. Oh, but don't worry, he'll survive. Somehow. As Bruce puts the top sand warrior on his pappy's horse, they recall the animals in the pit, the story from Beasts of Burden that young Wayne wanted read to him so often. Tommy recalls it for the most part, if forgetting a couple details, about animals falling into a hole, eating the losers of various silly contests, until only one was left, and it's unknown whether or not he got out. It's all going to be explained in the movie trilogy. Part 1 covers the basic story we've seen, Part 2 sees the fox crawl his way out, only to find himself conscripted into a conflict that has nothing to do with him, but sees it as a chance for redemption, and Part 3 has the families of all those critters he ate, hunting him for revenge. Hollywood, call me. Thomas recalls how quiet and quick to crying Bruce used to be, having expected his son to be more like himself, and thinks he benefited from his own dad's disciplinary slaps, making him tough.
You were disappointed. No, never. I wanted you to be your own man. I still do.
Oh, so that's why you helped a lunatic thoroughly ruin his life, prevent him from continuing his work as Batman and Bruce Wayne, and hooked him up to an actual nightmare machine, all to get him to stop his life as a hero. Because you want him to be his own man. Makes total sense. They find an oasis where we get some more embarrassing childhood stories, of Bruce screaming for that book. Stubborn Martha refused to let him cry it out like Thomas suggested, so he'd read the disgusting story over and over, even though he couldn't fathom why Bruce liked it so much. No indication if Thomas ever suggested Martha read it to him if she was so on board. And almost like there's a theme going on here, they come to a gigantic hole in the ground. And somehow I still can't hit a hole-in-one on this course. It's the entrance to the Naim pit, where one life can be traded for another. On Flashpoint Earth, Bat Doc watched Ra's al Ghul use it to sacrifice himself to save his daughter, who Tommy had killed years before, and now on this Earth he'll revive Martha with the Death Warrior they've been carrying. Sorry, he bled out a while back. I guess being draped over a horse in a desert and not keeping tabs on his wounds because you were too busy reminiscing about gruesome fairy tales wasn't the best medical treatment, Dr. Wayne.
Are you a real doctor or a doctor like Dr. Pepper's a doctor?
Bruce asks how that other version of his mom had died, Thomas only replying that it wasn't easy, but it doesn't matter. Soon they'll be a family again. They climb down via a rope, and Alter Pappy continues about the book, how Bruce would doze off and Tom would visualize his son's future, free from struggle and pain as he'd nod off as well, only for his son to scream himself awake, wanting to hear that book read again. Martha refused to get rid of it because she had faith that Bruce, despite the nightmares, could still dream of a better world. The whole meaning behind this recall was to point out Bruce's addiction to the Batman identity, and though Thomas spoiled him with that story, he's become more practical since his wife's death, putting away love and sympathy. Yeah, I'm sure a suddenly revived Martha, now in a world decades after her death, is going to love an older, grouchier version of her husband who lacks compassion and helped torment her son. You really thought this through, didn't you? This is why Bats needed to be broken, giving him a low point so his parents could be his way out of the caped life. Bruce explains he wanted to hear that story over and over again because he childishly thought it might change with each reading, holding onto the hope that someone would make it out of that pit. Maybe he wasn't tough like his dad, but stubborn like his mom, as demonstrated when he starts fighting his Flashpoint father, while narration recites the story we've been discussing. I kind of relate to that explanation. As a kid, I would always insist we rent Tim Burton's Batman just about every weekend, even though that scene of Joker reducing a mobster to a charred skeleton with a hand buzzer freaked me right out. I didn't have nightmares about it, nor did I think it would change with each viewing, and my dad didn't seem to mind. But I did annoy a couple of my siblings over it. In the scuffle, the doc is thrown onto the coffin, breaking it open to reveal it filled with stones. While he slept, Bruce buried Martha in the desert, where he'll never find her. The younger man figured he could hurt his dad badly enough that neither would leave the pit, as he didn't know if he could defeat him. Seems to me Bats has beaten tougher opponents than an older version of his dad, but he may still have some tricks up his bat-binned sleeves. Thomas insists he can only be his son, but Batman says the one truth he learned in that alley was that his parents were dead, and he's still here, as they continue fighting into the darkness. The comic ends the following morning, as one black-gloved hand crawls out of the pit.
Boba Fett grabs onto the sand outside the Sarlacc pit, and the feared bounty hunter pulls himself.
That was The Fall and The Fallen, which I thought was mostly good, though it does reveal some complications with the run as a whole. It progresses the ongoing events fine enough that Bane's schemes didn't end the instant Batman woke up, and much like Calendar Man noted, the villain isn't going to stop. He's all about conquering, and now he's more or less taken the city of his greatest rival. But as I said, the level of intricacy to all this, the detailing of Bane's involvement, raises so many unnecessary questions. For example, if Claire and or Hank were in on it, and why work for Bane alongside Psycho Pirate over some undefined personal idea of heroism? Was her brother's death part of the plan? Why have this whole thing with Bane wanting to start over when he was apparently never done with Gotham City or its protector? Thomas's narration makes it seem like Bruce witnessed the booster-wrecked timeline firsthand, when he didn't, and Skeets was constantly saying what a bad idea it was to muck with time. So how'd he convince Golds to go through with it? What about Ivy literally taking over the planet? You can't tell me that was part of the plan. Seems like her being connected to everyone would be quite the monkey wrench. I think someone, be it King or an editor, lost track of details in such a long run. As for Thomas's willingness to go along with the whole thing, I can't say it gets any better. I'm not overly familiar with what this particular version has gone through, only that he's meaner, willing to kill, and is condescending enough to consider his grown son a child, and Bane's tactics part of one or more games. I can see how he'd think that breaking his son's spirit would be the only way to get him to give up the bat. Not that he seemed to consider any other option. He previously said that Waynes may fall, but they always rise, so he must have hoped that Bruce would rise, specifically in a way he wanted. But for someone that's been able to outmaneuver his younger counterpart, he didn't seem to anticipate that Batman would just do what he's always done and be Batman.
I'm Batman.
Almost like leaving the city he'd spent years protecting to the mercy of a steroidal dictator wasn't the best selling point. We'll see how Gotham has been faring on that front next week. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.